Coming up on Outlook, well, as the nation prepares to celebrate its independence, it's a befitting time to address the status of those who fought to keep our nation free. Are the veteran services doing enough for our servicemen and women? We're going to take a look at that and some of the services available to veterans in our area up next on Outlook. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Outlook. I'm your host, Barbara Deeb. You know, according to a Rand Corporation study back in 2014, there are about 2.7 million American veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Now that compares with 8.2 million Vietnam-era veterans. The Rand study finds that 20% of the Iraq-Afghan veterans have some form of depression or PTSD. 50% do not seek treatment. In addition, many veterans have trouble reconnecting with loved ones upon their return home and to the life that they had known. On the program today, putting veterans' issues in the region on the table, in the forefront. We welcome to the program three individuals in the know. We're going to start with a professor of sociology at Western Kentucky University and himself a Vietnam-era veteran and regional project director of the Veterans History Project, which took place in around 2005. Dr. Gary Villarreal joins us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
In addition, we are joined by Colonel William Lytle, retired U.S. Air Force, Vice Commander of the American Legion Post 65, past President Cumberland Trace Chapter of the Military Officers Association of America. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure being here.
And Donnie Brown joins us, who represents the American Legion Post 23. Also, all three of you, Vietnam-era veterans. That just happened. I didn't plan it that way. Yeah. But thank you for being here. And interestingly enough, Donnie, before we got started, you said you became a part of the Navy to avoid going to Vietnam?
Yes.
Surprise! What happened?
I ended up on a riverboat. Run up down the rivers in Vietnam along the Cambodian border. That was my job, so that's what I did.
That was my job, that's what I did. And is that what being a veteran is really? That was my job, that's what I did?
That's pretty much sums it up in a great sense, because once you got into the military and began to get a sense about it, it really became a commitment and a responsibility to others.
You agree with that?
Yes, it's always very interesting to try to get stories out of veterans when they come back from the war zone especially, but for whatever they did. A lot of times, oh, I didn't do anything, I was just in the military, you know, I didn't really do anything, but everybody that has served has played a very important part, and sometimes it's very important to get those people to realize that.
Yeah, that they played a major role. It's all everybody working together. We talked about the fact that, you know, and it was just perchance that you all happen to be Vietnam-era veterans, but you fought a war and came back home to people who were protesting you, protesting your efforts. You know, how does that compare with the veterans that you deal with today that come from Iran and Iraq?
I'm jealous of them to some extent, because people stop in the airports and applaud them. People stopped us in the airport and threw chicken livers at us and stuff. It was totally different than it is now. And anyway.
But that's a huge difference.
Sure.
Huge difference. And here you were thinking you weren't going to go to Vietnam. I'll join the Navy. Surprise, you end up in Vietnam, and then you come home and people are throwing chicken livers at you in an airport.
Right.
Can't even imagine. Similar experience?
Well, not really, because I was still in the Air Force. I was still stationed at bases around the country, and so we didn't have that direct contact, as you would say, getting off the boat or getting off the plane and being thrust back into the civil world. So we had a little bit of a shield, those of us who, at least in the Air Force. And but strong memories, and I remember when the POWs were released, for instance, what a traumatic experience that was, watching them come back from North Korea.
And then the POWs, you're referencing the prisoners of war who were kept
up there for so long. And we were very well aware of our compatriots and what they went through. But again, at least for myself, it was much more of an isolated situation there. We had the mental trauma, but it wasn't a personal trauma that we had to live with day in and day out.
You signed up, you enlisted?
No, I was drafted and also went into an MOS that was combat oriented. But one of the things that was interesting is that the Army really learns a lot from their lessons. And when I returned in 1970, we returned like 3 o'clock in the morning. And they told us to get out of uniforms as we left so that we wouldn't leave with our uniforms on to prevent those kind of confrontations that were happening earlier on with the protests. And so there was lessons learned to kind of shield us from that, but we were also told not to talk about it.
You were told not to talk
Right.
about it?
Right.
So your commanding officers, as you're getting ready to reacclimate into civilian life, say to you, don't wear those uniforms as you're getting off because we don't want anybody attacking you or
Yeah, it was
protesting.
a big, like at Oakland, California, and it was a big, they addressed us that way. So it was a group of us that were being discharged, and they said, these are some things that you want to avoid doing.
Don't talk about it. That sort of sums up one of the bigger issues related to veterans of all wars, and that is the don't talk about it. And so where do they go? They go inside. They suffer a lot of depression, veterans. And we also have something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's so many of our veterans. I think the statistic at the beginning I gave was 20% of those returning suffer some form of PTSD. Did you get the don't talk about it too?
I think I did that more to myself than I was told to do it. I just, excuse me, I just couldn't talk about it. Didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want anybody to know what I'd done. You know.
Or been through.
Yeah.
Was there a point down the road when you realized, I've got to talk about this, I have to share this life experience?
Yeah, 10 years after I got back, I had a real problem. I was hospitalized, and then I started talking about it to a psychiatrist, and we got things worked out.
But it took 10 years.
Yeah.
It took 10 years. We hear a lot about veterans who come back from war, whether it's Vietnam, Iraq, Iran, or Afghanistan, and just loud noises, can force them to the ground because they are in such a mode, or they clam up, close up, and they can't deal with life around them because they just can't get through it. So what kinds of resources are available for veterans who may be suffering? And as we say, so many of them don't seek treatment because that's not what we do.
Well, one of the things that the Veterans Administration instituted in 1989 was, or 1979, was the vet centers. And there's one in Nashville, and Dan Edwards, who's a counselor, comes to the Bowling Green area every Tuesday to work with individuals who are experiencing problems. The difficulty is that PTSD often is latent. So someone may go through life for a period of time and they're fine, or they appear to be fine, or they're very busy, keeping themselves so busy they don't stop and think. Then all of a sudden one day they have something that triggers them that could have been there every single day. All of a sudden everything comes flooding back, and then they don't know what to do.
The floodgates are open.
The floodgates are open, and then it's like just over. And it can, I've had individuals I've met who've been just coming out recently for the first time. This is 20, 30 years. And all this time when they retire or they have peace and safety, then it kind of comes to the surface.
It's like the letdown
Yeah.
where they can just let that happen. Post-traumatic stress disorder. If only it were simple to say, take your blood pressure and you've got PTSD. It's not so simple.
No.
And so diagnosis is one thing, but coming forward and saying I have a problem is a whole different thing. If I'm not mistaken, back in the other world wars, like World War II, they would reference this as maybe shell shock.
Yes. Right.
Somebody who was shell shocked. But now, when did it get this title, PTSD, and we started identifying it as such?
Around 1977, Charles Figley and Tom Williams came up with the the symptoms for post-traumatic stress disorder and introduced that and began researching it to demonstrate that there were specific symptoms that were related to it. And then it was adapted by the American Psychological Association as a disorder, anxiety disorder, where if someone they have to have the identified trauma, they re-experience the trauma uncontrollably, they avoid issues that relate to the trauma, and then they also have hypervigilance, which is hearing loud noises, hitting the dirt, and stuff like that. So when all these pieces fall together, it begins to surface. And it's sort of like on a continuum. Some individuals have somewhat PTSD, some have more intense PTSD. That's why they have different ratings for it, because it does affect individuals differently.
And if I could, and I may be wrong here, but I understand now that concussions are being tied in more and more with some of the symptoms too.
Like a TBI, a traumatic brain injury,
yes,
in some cases. And we're seeing an awful lot of that coming back from war. Yeah. So PTSD, there is a spectrum, there is a continuum, and again, now we can rate it and we can tell that maybe this person is suffering, but it's up to that individual then to want to seek treatment.
That and the family.
The family.
Yeah, if the family is supportive, there'll oftentimes be an impetus to get the individual. Like a number of veterans that have come into vet centers and stuff have talked about how their family said, "Would you please do something for us?" So they're doing it for the family, not so much for themselves initially.
That problem and bringing it to the public.
Yeah. Right.
And bringing it to their attention, yeah, that something's got to get done. We're talking about veterans issues, and there are a lot of them. We could probably take hours, but we're going to take a short break here on Outlook, and when we come back, we'll talk more about some of the resources available for our veterans. Stay tuned. Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and our social media, and of course our website at wkyupbs.org. On the program today, we're talking about veterans issues. Before the break, we identified some of the symptoms related to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and we are welcoming back to the program Dr. Gary Villarreal. He is a professor of sociology, a Vietnam-era veteran, and in the 2005 area of time, he was the regional project director of the Veterans History Project. Thank you for being with us. Donnie Brown joins us, representing the American Legion Post 23, and retired Colonel William Lytle, retired U.S. Air Force Vice Commander, American Legion Post 65, and past president of the Cumberland Trace chapter of the Military Officers Association of America. Thank you for being here. Let's recap for our audience that might just be rejoining us. We talk about, and it turns out that all three of these gentlemen are veterans of the Vietnam War. And it turns out that no matter what war you are a veteran of, there are many consistent issues that follow you. And in particular, we are hearing a lot more about what used to be called shell shock, now called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So we now have a continuum of sorts, a way that we can rate and determine how much post-traumatic stress this person has. So what are some of the symptoms?
Well, the symptoms that are most prevalent relate to sort of not wanting to deal with the things that trigger them, that cause memories that come up that they feel oftentimes guilty about. They have sometimes feel shame, and there's what's referred to sometimes as moral integrity, that something was something morally wrong with what they were doing because it wasn't according to their upbringing. So it's very difficult in terms of really looking at what is going on with one particular individual, because you could have two individuals with the same experience having different reactions because they're looking at it from a different perspective.
Very true. And as you pointed out too, it's just, it comes in different forms. It comes in different waves. You shared a story.
About my grandson?
Yeah.
Yes, it was very interesting. He had returned to Fort Lewis from his first tour in Iraq. He was in convoy duty and spent a year. Did get blown up with an IED when he was a turnip gunner in a Humvee. And I went out to visit him 2 weeks after he got back and met up with he and his wife. And first thing she told me was, "You've got to be on time with everything you do. If you're a minute late, leaving the house, he'll get very nervous. He wants everything to be exactly on time. The second thing is we kind of indicated where you walk up behind, basically scare him, touch him in the back just without him knowing that. She said, he just about went crazy when I did that the first time. And loud noises, react very quickly to loud noises. And the example I used during the break was when he was driving down past the firing range in his truck. He had one of those most powerful trucks you could get, 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. Heard an explosion go off, he floored that thing and approached nearly 100 miles an hour on base, just his reaction to the situation.
So identifying veterans who might be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder is easier now because we have this system where we can do, but what's more difficult is getting that person to maybe admit that they have a problem. You talked about how important the family, the immediate family, is to that diagnosis.
Yes, they are the ones that really notice that something's wrong, that something's not normal. As you indicated earlier, the person that has the problem is going to try to hide it. They're going to deny the situation. So it's going to be the relatives, it's going to be the family that identifies the problem.
Is it a sign of weakness? Is that the fear, or is it just not even wanting to deal with anything related to that? What do you see more of?
It's more a matter of pride in terms of feeling that there's something wrong with them. Because in terms of oftentimes their duties, if you're completing your duties, then you're helping your other soldiers. But when you're not doing your duty, then it's something is wrong with you. But in fact, it's not anything wrong. It's in fact, there's evidence that shows that the amygdala in the brain is actually shaped differently for individuals who have post-traumatic stress disorder. The same with traumatic brain injury. Their brains have a different look about them. And the unique thing about traumatic brain injury is that individuals feel like they're somebody different than who they were before that.
They actually have that feeling.
And that is really what's difficult to deal with, because here they are feeling someone different than how they used to be. And their family often identifies them as being different.
So here we have this, you know, we can now diagnose it. They feel differently. Maybe they decide they're going to get help. Where do you go? Who do you talk to? What do you say?
Well, the important thing that the VA has done is they have a hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255. And that's answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if a person calls that number, they'll be directed as, for number one is for a veteran, number two is for a family member or a friend, and they'll get someone on the line within a minute. It's the fastest.
Timing is important.
The fastest hotline available in the United States.
And just have somebody to talk to,
Right.
to maybe talk them through.
And oftentimes they get them to a VA crisis center or the hospital emergency room or something like that.
Because we haven't even begun to talk about suicide rates, 22 a day for veterans. So getting back to the just asking for help, you said it took you 10 years before something else triggered you to be able to share your experience. So we have these young men and women who are coming back, maybe suffering from post-traumatic stress, depression, thinking about suicide. So they can call a hotline. They can get some referrals there. But what about, I want to go somewhere, I want to talk face-to-face with somebody. Where can they go?
Well, can I jump in here?
Sure.
On our Community Blueprint Southern Kentucky Veterans Council? We've established a group here that you have the telephone number for Crystal Stinson that will be shown afterwards, and she will take a call. You call her and she's out there to help. There's many other organizations. You have a list of them here that help in various aspects, whether you're homeless or what other situations you have that contribute to your problem. But I think within our community, within the Brad area, I believe that we have a very strong support group, and I'm very proud of that. Out in the outlying districts, like in Metcalfe County, it's very hard sometimes to find that veteran that might need a ride to make his medical appointment. There are still a lot of things going on, and veterans are dropping through the crack, but we're trying hard to bring everybody together.
And that's the key. And we are going to put up some phone numbers and some email addresses, or websites rather, that you can, at the end of the program, maybe get some referrals or get some information. And maybe through programs like this, people might know somebody who needs help. The American Legion Post also is available to help. Because like you say, sometimes it's as simple as a veteran needing a ride to get to his medical appointment, to get to his psychology appointment.
We have a van that goes down to Nashville Monday through Thursday, and takes the veterans down, brings them back, and it's just a great service. There's no charge. You don't even have to be a member of the American Legion. You just need to be a veteran, and they'll take you down.
And do those things for you. And the same with the regional as well?
No, as a matter of fact, our VFW post out in Metcalfe County has been looking for ways to get that help and service. Parts of Kentucky, they have vans that Kentucky Veterans Affairs Office has done a tremendous job, and I want to put a pitch in for Heather French Henry. She is tremendous. She had a father that had PTSD problems. She's very well aware of that. She's jumped in there to help us in every way she can, and I think we owe her a vote since she's come into office 1 July. But there are still needs, and there are people working the problem, but they haven't been solved yet.
So you're watching this program, maybe you're listening to what we're talking about. We're talking about veterans of all shapes and sizes, and now we have a lot more women who are coming back as veterans. And you know, again, the cry for help might be internal, but externalizing it and actually saying, I need help, is a tough thing to do. What would you say to someone who might be watching?
Well, I would say, especially for women veterans, is that they have a special unit that identifies working primarily with female veterans. And it's difficult for them because they oftentimes don't feel they're in combat situations, even though they experience combat, because if you're in a very safe location and you get mortared or rocketed, that's a combat situation. So that makes it difficult for them because sometimes they feel that they need to stand up more for themselves because they've had to prove more.
Yes, prove that they're women.
Yeah.
And to that, you would concur?
Oh yes. It has been a different ballgame, and I've seen it change quite a bit since the women that were in the military were nurses back in the 50s, basically, a few other jobs, and how they have expanded their reach throughout the military services. I know it was that way in the flying game, if you would. But so there are many more situations now, but maybe it's becoming a more even playing field. I'm not sure.
How do you feel about that, Don?
What?
A more even playing field?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You think it is?
It's becoming that way. It's not there yet. I'm a service officer with the American Legion, and I deal with some women. And they've got it rough. We really do.
You know, we talked about the fact that all three of you are Vietnam-era veterans, and thank you. And coming back from that war, and in many cases not getting the proper reception. You were shunned, you were assaulted, you were yelled at, protested against. You know, what would you say to people who are watching who now encounter a veteran of some sort? What is it you want to hear when someone encounters? You know, you talked about Iraq, Afghan veterans getting applause at the airports. What would you like to hear?
Simple thank you. That's it.
I think we make a mistake, and this is my own personal feeling, and I've not expanded on this very much, but I think we make a mistake when we look at them as heroes. I think, as you said, we want to say thank you for your service. You've done a good job. If you build almost all of these veterans up as heroes, then at some point they're going to fall because they don't think they're heroes.
Right.
Much like you referenced with the women veterans who maybe were not in direct combat, don't feel like they are deserving of having post-traumatic stress disorder and kind of shelter it.
Right.
Answer the question I asked them, if you will. What would you like to hear?
Well, thank you for your service. It means a lot. And I get a lot of support from my family. Like, I get a card for a welcome home card, like on April 12th of night. My wife gives me a card, my daughter gives me a card.
That's
and
the day you came home?
Yes.
From
so,
Vietnam?
Yeah, so
April
that
12th.
means a lot to me because and it's always Veterans Day. They do special things for me and things like that. So that means a lot more to me than just maybe always hearing it from the general public, because I haven't always felt that way.
That's beautiful. And so a simple thank you goes a long way. And we're quickly running out of time. If maybe there's a veteran or a loved one of a veteran who's watching the show and has noticed that that person maybe needs some help, what advice would you have for them?
Come talk to a veteran, because many of us are willing to help the best way we can.
And help is out there.
Yes.
And
I would
Colonel
encourage them to join the veterans organizations. Almost everywhere we have the American Legion, we have the VFW, and even if you might not qualify for the VFW, come out, talk to them. They're there.
24/7?
24/7.
24/7, so help is out there. And if you don't mind to give that crisis line telephone number again, just say it if you would.
1-800-273-8255.
We've got some additional phone numbers and some other information at the end of the show, but we would encourage you to not take advantage, but use these amazing resources that are available.
They've earned it.
Yeah.
They've earned
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
They have, and so have you all. Thank you so much. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Outlook. I'm Barbara Deed. Thanks for joining us.